Maybe this will help with you understanding you. Maybe this will help with you understanding your children or your partner. But the intention is to help with you understanding your clients and the people whom you evaluate for the courts. Please recall that all of this arises in the context of laws which time and again give children who have obtained an ambiguous degree of age and or maturity certain privileges, but it's never defined. So we're going to try to define it here. We left before the break highlighting that maturity is not a singular thing. Height is a singular thing. Height is a unidimensional variable. If you had 100 teenagers, you could line them up in order of height, and there'd be little or no disagreement, because the shortest is obviously the shortest and the tallest is obviously the tallest. You can't do that with maturity, globally speaking, but we're going to break it down and maybe be able to talk about differences in maturity by kinds of maturity. And the law doesn't do that. Development doesn't happen like this. Please look at the screen. You can't get this in your book. But the law would have us believe that. I'll do it again for you. I love the image. Ready, set, grow. Doesn't happen. Development happens like this. We all have strengths. We all have weaknesses. I'm going to steal a phrase from Piaget. Do you all know Piaget a little bit? He's a cognitive developmental theorist who talked about development within the domain of cognitive development. Piaget only talked about cognitive development. Within that domain, he identified something called developmental décollage. I speak a little bit of French. I don't know what décollage means in English. Do you? I'd love to learn. Give you a prize. No? I don't know. Yeah. Sounds like something you do with, isn't that an art form? Like a craft? Découpage. Oh, this is décollage, right. Thank you. You really want a prize though, right? Yeah. All right, so Piaget talked about differences within the domain of cognitive development, identifying that some areas of cognitive development grow faster than others within the individual. I'm borrowing that to apply it more globally because if you look at this slide, it illustrates the idea that there is scatter within the individual across different domains of development. Call that décollage. One of those areas of development and the easiest to identify because it's visibly evident is physical maturity. Let's define that specifically as the attainment of secondary sexual characteristics. Pediatricians, physicians in general, talk about that in terms of Tanner stages. So if you get a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old and a 14-year-old in the pediatrician's office, presumably 5 different pediatricians identifying or examining those 3 different kids would agree, Tanner stage, this number, this number, this number. It's a fairly reliable and valid index of maturity in the physical domain. We don't have that in other domains. Social maturity. Let's talk about the mastery of verbal and behavioral nuances that facilitate acceptance in the interpersonal environment. Big, ugly phrase, I know, but it's all that good stuff that makes you fit in. Social maturity is the ability to fit in. Children whose parents are highly conflicted develop in the social domain precociously. They have to. They become chameleons. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Social development refers to the mastery of culturally endorsed interpersonal skills such as turn-taking, sharing, empathy, and perspective-taking. When I was in school, we called these pro-social skills. Lots of little kids with ADD and ADHD, genuine, real ADD and ADHD, who are very impulsive, need psychotherapy and or some other kind of training or coaching to learn how to wait your turn, stand in line, raise your hand, don't run out into the street to get the ball. These are pro-social things that keep you fitting into the social environment and alive, in the case of the ball. Social maturity is often specific to subculture and peer group. Anybody know that guy? You're showing your age. Eddie Haskell, Leave It to Beaver. Remember him? Eddie Haskell is the poster boy for precocious social maturity. Eddie Haskell is the kid that those lawyers in Massachusetts, that Suzanne, I forget her name at the moment, the study we referred to earlier, they would all judge him to be super mature. He would be allowed to have his own abortion. Well, you understand the problem there. This is Eddie Haskell's profile. Don't be fooled. And this is Eddie Haskell.
How do you do, Mrs. Cleaver?
Oh, hello, Eddie.
It's quite a pleasant afternoon out, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I suppose you want to see Wally.
Yes, that is calling for me.
Well, it won't inconvenience me at all, but he's out looking for the beaver.
The little fellow.
All right, we can't hear that. No, it's not worth it. Thank you. Thank you. If you don't remember Eddie Haskell, YouTube him. He's all full of kiss-up and niceness, and it's all empty facade because he's a rascal underneath it all. And then, okay, so we talk about physical maturity, we talk about social maturity. I know I'm doing this stuff fast. Usually I would spend longer on it, but you're getting the idea. Then we talk about cognitive and verbal maturity, and that is indeed where Piaget comes into this. Cognitive and verbal maturity is not IQ. You cannot give a Whisk, a Wace, a Stanford Binet to get cognitive and verbal maturity. You can get capacity with those tests, where I would define, Vicki, you may need to help me here, I would define IQ as how big is the cup, and achievement is how full is the cup. But this isn't what we're talking about. We're talking about cognitive maturity. We're talking about the ability to grasp abstracts, to entertain hypotheticals, to manipulate ideas, and to foresee consequences. So if you're going to ask a kid, not, who do you want to live with? Which I don't ask kids. But if you're going to ask a kid, what would happen if you lived with mom mostly, if you lived with dad mostly? I want to know, can they think that through? Well, what does that have to do with, distance to school, waking up in the morning because you have a longer ride, access to friends, access to Xbox, the rules in the home, M&Ms for breakfast versus broccoli? I don't care about the substance in this instance so much as I care about, can the kid cognitively think through, if this, in that quantum world over there, what would happen? And if this, in that quantum world, what would happen? You follow the idea? Cognitive development includes recognizing patterns, organizing perceptions, developing language, considering alternatives, prioritizing options. A lot of it is executive functioning, this thing behind the forehead here. ADD, ADHD kids, now this is a gross overgeneralization, but those kids don't tend to be cognitively mature in the way that we're talking about. Let me show you one instance of extreme cognitive maturity.
Just in time. I believe I've isolated the algorithm for making friends. Yeah, Sheldon Cooper here. It occurred to me that you hadn't returned any of my calls because I hadn't offered any concrete suggestions for pursuing our friendship. Yet perhaps the two of us might share a meal together. Yeah, I see. Well, then perhaps you'd have time for a hot beverage. Popular choice. I see. No, wait, don't hang
I'd rather turn this off, thank you.
What about a recreational activity?
Okay, with apologies for the AV trouble, you all know Sheldon Cooper, you've seen Big Bang Theory. Sheldon Cooper, his profile, I'm sorry it's not up there in front of you. If you were to chart different areas of development, Sheldon's cognitive development would be way up here, but his social development is way down here. And here in this slide, this image, this clip, in case you couldn't hear it, Sheldon was trying to compensate for his very immature social skills with his super maturated intellectual skills. He had an algorithm worked out for how to make a friend. It doesn't work that way, Sheldon. This is really interesting, and the court stumbles over this all the time. In hypothetical situations, if you ask teenagers, hypothetically, what would you do? In hypothetical situations, children over the age of 14 are virtually indistinguishable from adults in their decision-making capacities. But in real life, this is a Tom Grisso study. If you don't know Tom's work, you should check it out, Grisso. In real life, those same kids are more likely than young adults to make choices that reflect a propensity to comply with authority figures. They're subject to peer pressure. In real life, those same kids are less likely to recognize the risks inherent in the various choices. Remember to consider alternatives, hypotheticals, what ifs, and consequences of their legal decisions. Don't be fooled by a child's abstract cognitive ability to talk to you about hypotheticals. In real life, they don't do what they say they would do. The social pressures in particular corrupt their ability to exercise their more mature cognitive decisions. You follow that? It's important. And then we talk about moral maturity, which we'll spend the least time on, even though we're racing through this much too quickly. Moral maturity refers to the growth from rigid, rule-bound compliance toward contextual and personal meanings of decision-making, being able to take responsibility for one's own actions. A developmental theoretician by the name of Kohlberg, Kohlberg, taught us about moral development. If you YouTube, don't Google, YouTube Kohlberg, you'll find a lot of high school students' video clips understanding their younger siblings' moral development. They pose moral dilemmas like this one. A man's wife is dying. The drugs that will save her life are in the pharmacy. The pharmacy is locked. Should he break into the pharmacy to get the drugs to save her life? At the lowest level of moral maturity, we're rule-bound and we say, of course not, because it's locked. That's breaking and entering. You'll get in trouble. And as we mature, we begin to take context into consideration and understand that there are some pluses and minuses to the scenario. And damn it, yes, I'm going to break in. I don't care. I'm going to save her life. Kohlberg defined 3 general levels of moral maturity and several different stages in each. I'm not going to bother you with these details. I believe they're printed out in front of you. In any case, Kohlberg shifts from the earliest pre-conventional moral maturity to conventional and post-conventional, where people begin to consider a higher good and to make decisions based on how they see the world rather than what is written down for them. I save for last, we've talked about physical, we've talked about social, we've talked about moral and cognitive maturity. I've saved for last the one that I hang my hat on. If I had to advise a court, and I have on occasion, but not often, about a child's maturity as the law dictates it, I hang my hat on the child's emotional maturity. Emotional maturity, this isn't science. Emotional maturity is the foundational piece necessary, even if maybe not sufficient, but necessary in order for all the rest of that stuff to really be useful. Emotional maturity in broadest overview means being able to manage the affective, the emotional consequences of the decisions that occur, that you make. It means being able to regulate yourself. It's that self-regulation piece again. And to make it as simple as I can, I want to talk to you about MPG, miles per gallon. I invite you to steal this idea. It's clinically really useful when you talk to parents this way. Because it works like this. Emotional maturity, generally speaking, is the ability to regulate one's own emotional experience, including things like delay of gratification, the ability to tolerate frustration, and the ability to express your emotional state. Children often want more from the world than they can emotionally manage. I can think of a dozen kids off the top of my head who have been parentified or adultified by their caregivers, who sit on the couch next to dad to watch the evening news, who say, isn't it horrible about what's happening in politics and the world and war and famine, and they can cognitively manage it, but then they can't sleep and they can't go to school the next day and they have tummy aches and they're anxious and they're a wreck. They don't have the emotional maturity to keep up with their cognitive maturity. Excuse me. And so we talk about emotional maturity in terms of fuel efficiency. Remember that anchor? Now I'm going to twist your mind a little bit here because I'm going to mix my metaphors. The anchor is a fuel tank. The anchor, your secure base, to use attachment language, your caregiver, your safety net, is the place that you go to get emotional fuel. Emotional maturity is how far you can go on that fuel before you have to come back to get refueled again. You and I, as healthy adults, of course, we go a long way. Except when you're sick, when you're exhausted, when you're stressed, then you go a lesser distance. Your infant goes 2 seconds. Your teenager says he can go 10 years, but stress him out and he comes back to you, won't admit to it. He needs to get his tank refilled again. So the questions that we ask about emotional maturity include, where do you get emotionally refueled? Right now in your head, don't move your lips. Where do you get emotionally refueled? Me and my little yellow kayak is only part of the answer. I have a wife and children and friends. Don't tell my wife I'm going to admit this, but I take some comfort in my dogs even. I have a mixed relationship with my dogs. I take comfort in the familiarity of my office. That's kind of weird, but if I came into my office and things were disrupted, I don't share well. I'm not emotionally very mature. If you came into my office and used my office and left things out of place, I would be disturbed and less comfortable. Where do you get that? How far can you go on a full tank? What do you do when your tank is empty? And are you able to fuel others? So let's make a distinction. I don't speak car. Luke does. I don't speak car, but it's my understanding that there's a thing called a Hummer, that big vehicle on the left over there. And a Hummer, you have to talk about gallons per mile. Or a Prius, a hybrid, you talk about 50, 70, 80, 100 miles per gallon. Infants are supposed to be Hummers. They need to be refueled often. You and I, we're pre-I. That's the plural. We get really good mileage. And we're able to refuel our children. Now here is an essential paradigm in families. This is one of the things that I try to pay really close attention to when I do a custody evaluation. I want to know, is the parent able and willing to refuel the child? Does the parent recognize when the child's tank is empty? How does the parent respond to that? From attachment theory, the phrase there is sensitive and responsive caregiving. It's an important phrase. I use it a lot in the reports that I write. Sensitive and responsive caregiving. I've already told you the book Holding Tight, Letting Go is about this. So look at the slides, please, folks. Little Billy there in the center can be refueled by parents who are apart. There is nothing inherently wrong with mom and dad living 2 separate places. Remember, it takes a village so long as the villagers can communicate and cooperate with one another. If mom and dad, regardless of their physical addresses, can weave that safety net, Billy will get refueled. That works. Billy can even be refueled by a single parent, although in order for any caregiver to fuel a child, the caregiver has to get fueled him or herself. So I want especially that single caregiver to have a lot of resources in his or her world so that, forgive me all the his or hers, let's just say her, so that her gas tank is full so that she can give to the child. A problem comes up that we'll talk about later. I've already used the words adultified and parentified. When parents, particularly under the stress of high conflict divorce, turn to their children and ask the children to refuel them. That's pathology. Okay, I'm going on a tangent now. We don't have time, but I have to anyway. Don't get confused. I try really hard not to diagnose people. I am irrationally adverse to the use of individual adult psychometric instruments, testing for adults in the context of custody-related matters. The stuff that we're talking about here today is not about the individual. The stuff we're talking about today is about relationships, dynamics. DSM, I don't care whatever number you want. ICD, I don't care whatever number you want. All those diagnostic nosologies are about this human being has this level of pathology. That is not the question in family-related matters, in family law. The question in family-related law, 9 times out of 10, is how does the fit between mom and dad and child, how does the fit in the relationship work? Diagnosis, individual testing confuses the problem. It doesn't help it. Now, if I'm aggravating you, if you disagree with me, please come talk to me over lunch. I'm going to do a big talk on this in front of a whole lot of people in September in San Diego. I'm going to say we shouldn't use diagnostic testing anymore in custody evaluations, and half the room is going to boo me. So I want you to come argue with me because I got to tune up my argument. I got to get ready for that. But I'm telling you here today, at the risk of aggravating people, that the work that we do is not about individual diagnosis, individual pathology. It's not about whether that person there, look, I got a fancy pointer, see that? It's not about whether she has a diagnosis or not. It's about how these people fit together. It's about how she turns to her resources to get refueled. Okay, end of tangent, back on track. Y'all with me? Good. Do you know what a transitional object is? This is important. A transitional object is something that represents to the child a source of emotional fuel. We can help kids manage the stresses of the world, including but only separation and divorce, by teaching their caregivers to give them transitional objects, little tiny red gas cans. You know, the baby's got a binky in his mouth or her mouth, the toddler's got a blankie. There was a 5-year-old on the airplane with me yesterday for an hour and a half sucking on a pacifier. That kid's dentist is upset, at least. I thought he was 5. He was a big kid, yeah. Transitional objects facilitate self-regulation and emotional maturity, particularly during separation from a primary caregiver. Now, I'm going to give you a hypothetical, and because you are intellectually mature, I know you're going to follow it, but don't get emotionally caught up in this. If, God forbid, we were suddenly under lockdown here because there was some horrible event going on out there, because ISIS has targeted Lafayette, Louisiana. If you were in some horrible circumstance, if you were stuck in an elevator between floors, if there were a fire, I'll bet you that you would turn to your transitional objects as a source of emotional fuel. You would twiddle your wedding ring, you'd pull out the pictures on your phone, you'd think about how nice it was that your wife got you that tie. You'd call and talk to somebody that you cared about, because the stress depletes your mileage and you need to get refueled. You know what I'm saying? And that's us. We're Priuses. Our little Hummer kids, they need that stuff all the time. Send them back and forth from mom's house to dad's house every third day. That's stressful. So I often tell parents, it backfired on me recently, Mom and Dad, I want you wear cologne, you wear perfume, I want you to spritz a little bit on their pajamas or in their suitcase or something, so that when they're at the other home and they go to sleep, they're going to smell you there. Well, they both took me really seriously, and this poor kid couldn't stand his possessions. Drenched it in all of this stuff. Virtual visitation is the up-and-coming area of family law. It's a real practical dilemma or opportunity, as the case may be in family law, because we don't need anymore to have a binky or a blanket or a wedding ring. You can just Skype with the missing parent, and then the court gets all caught up in, well, can the parent on duty regulate the child's access to the absent parent, and when can the absent parent FaceTime with the child, and what if the parent on duty, you know what that phrase means, the parent on duty, what if the parent on duty is disciplining the child's in timeout? Can the child still have FaceTime access to the absent parent to say, this parent is so mean? You've run into all this stuff? I don't have an answer for you. But it's real. On the one hand, that's the stuff that fuels the child. On the other hand, that's the stuff that undermines the parent on duty's authority with the child. Co-parental conflict with or without marriage, with or without separation, with or without divorce. See that gas tank? Where does that kid get his fuel? Let me tell you a very quick story. Anna Freud, Sigmund's daughter, and a guy named Michael Rutter, R-U-T-T-E-R, did a study with children who survived World War II, the Holocaust, children who saw things that I don't even want to think about. Their very sound, very valid, and often replicated result is that children who go through trauma, who have a single, continuous, reliable anchor through it all, an emotional anchor through it all, can be okay. So I see a woman in therapy now, and honestly I've seen her off and on for probably 20 years, who had horrible, terrible trauma in her childhood, but who every Sunday went to her aunt's house to get her hair cut. And her aunt, it's a very sensual thing, your hair. And I swear that she's okay today because she got her hair cut every Sunday. Because she'd go home and get horribly abused and mistreated. This is important for a whole bunch of reasons, most primarily because you can be that anchor. And now here's my cynicism again. I don't work with managed health care. I'm glad to tell you more about that later. Managed health care wants to know, what are you fixing and how's progress going with that? And I don't blame them. That's okay. But the best therapy you can do with many of these kids is to just be an anchor for them. And you can't measure that and you can't check it off on a list. Go ahead and try, see what happens. I'm being an anchor for this child. Yeah, right. But they don't need their encopresis fixed in 6 sessions or no benefits. They need a port in the storm, and that's where we'll end today. We'll talk about that specifically. Family law decisions must speak to the child's emotional needs first and foremost. We need to answer the question, where and how does the child get refueled? How long can the child go between refueling? How can we help her grow her MPG? Now, a little bit off topic here, but I'm going to give you a general rule of thumb. This is not science. You cannot quote me on this. It is not science. You all sign the 15-page, 10-point font disclaimer at the door. You cannot quote me on this. But a general rule of thumb, a place to start thinking about these questions is this. A child should not be separated from a primary caregiver more consecutive nights than twice her age in years. A child cannot be separated from a primary caregiver more consecutive nights than twice her age in years. That is not science. But it means that at the outside limit, a 4-year-old shouldn't be more than 8 nights away from mom. A 10-year-old might be able to have a 3-week summer vacation with dad. A 2-year-old might be able to manage 4 nights, but a 1-year-old, and this is a huge controversy in family law, how long can a 1-year-old be away from a primary caregiver? We can't talk about that here today at any length because it's really complicated. I do not write parenting plans or custody evaluations based only on that rubric, but I keep it in mind as an outer limit so that we can think about these things. Emotional maturity should be the criterion relevant to family law matters. And in case you didn't recognize it, emotional maturity is all about attachment. So I know that you said earlier that you've studied attachment. And I know that you said earlier that you know about alienation. But we're going to talk about both of those things because I want them to be fresh in your mind and I want to give you a new perspective on both. We're going to talk about alienation after lunch. We're going to finish talking about attachment before lunch. Attachment security lays the foundation for emotional maturity. Attachment security asks the question, what has the child learned about a specific caregiver's willingness and availability to provide emotional fuel? If I fall down and skin my knee, can I expect that mom will be there to comfort me in a way that soothes me? In a way that soothes me, not the way she thinks I should be soothed, but in what I need. Or dad. It refers to sensitive and responsive care, one of my favorite phrases. And it talks about how the child uses a specific caregiver as an emotional anchor. The quality of each unique attachment relationship describes the child's learned ability to use the proximal adult to regulate anxiety. I emphasize learned because attachment is not genetically determined, pre-born, predetermined, and it's never set in stone. Attachment is based on what Bowlby called an internal working model. It's trivia, but at this point, you have an internal working model of me. Bad sense of humor, tries to speak French, can't stand still. You have some sense of, if you raise your hand or speak, how I might humiliate you or give you a prize. But I'm unimportant. You have an indelible, internal working model of the caregivers in your world. Now, I may have erred by saying indelible because it's mutable, it changes, it adapts. So we see that the postpartum depressed mom, the child will learn over the course of that mother's depression that I can't turn to mom because she's too grief-stricken, she's too unavailable to me. But now mom gets a little bit of an SSRI and some therapy and her hormones are corrected, and now she can respond, and the child gradually changes his or her internal working model of mom and becomes securely attached. Now I can depend on her. As opposed to the other parent, let's say dad, who was there for the child through the child's first several years, and the child knows, yes, dad is there for me, and now dad becomes a heroin addict, and now I'm going to turn to him, and where is he? Our internal working models are adaptable. We'll talk about that as we go along here. For all the time I spend talking to people about attachment theory, and for that matter, alienation, and for all the citations and research, and it's really good stuff if you're a nerd like me, but for all of that effort, I just found a long time ago that I'm better off telling you a children's story. I never mean to be condescending or patronizing. I know that you're really sophisticated adults, but I think the children's story here communicates the idea as well as anything and might stick with you over the course of time. So I'd like to introduce you to my friend Aloysius. I'd like to invite you, please, rather than looking at the pages in front of you, to look at the screen, because Aloysius will teach us about attachment theory. I love PowerPoint. Watch this. Once upon a time, there was a man. His name was Albert. And a woman. Her name was Alice. Albert and Alice fell in love and were married. In fact, we know that the marriage part is totally trivial and unimportant, but this is a children's story, so bear with me. After an appropriately discreet interval, baby Aloysius arrives. Goo. Baby Aloysius grows, and as he grows, he accumulates experience with his mommy and with his daddy. These experiences create expectations about how each parent will respond to his needs. I've told you an internal working model is that composite of expectations, Bowlby's concept of the child's accumulated experience with each caregiver. Attachment is specific to an individual. Attachment is not a general quality of a child. Attachment is not an individual measure. Attachment is a relationship measure. These expectations, Bowlby's internal working model, are adaptable. Watch the slide. Baby Aloysius' expectations change as the parent changes. As he gets new information directly through experience with mommy and daddy, his verbal skills grow, his cognitive maturity grows, he becomes gradually able to integrate third-party information into his internal working model. So now my expectations about mom's ability to respond in a sensitive and responsive way to my needs are informed first and foremost by my direct experience of her and by what dad says about her. Do you hear alienation coming up here? We'll get to that later. Your mom is loving and caring. Mom can inform baby Aloysius' expectations about dad as well. Attachment refers to the child's willingness to turn to a proximal caregiver for comfort, the degree to which that caregiver is, quote unquote, a secure base, an anchor, a fuel pump. We're mixing our metaphors, but you got the idea. Attachment is a qualitative measure. Attachment does not lend itself to comparisons. You cannot say, and if you read a report or catch the court saying, who is the child more attached to? Out of respect, you shouldn't laugh out loud, but you should respectfully suggest that, Your Honor, that's not how it works. We can talk about a child's quality of attachment with mom and dad being secure or insecure and degrees thereof, but you can't say the child is more securely attached to mom than to dad. Ain't so. If baby Aloysius experiences his mom as consistently sensitive and responsive to his needs, calm, consistent, clear, then he's able to use her to calm himself. He learns how to self-regulate. We've used that phrase a couple times today. We call this secure attachment. If, however, he experiences dad as relatively insensitive and unresponsive, he may not feel safe letting go. He may look clingy and dependent. We call that insecure resistant. If baby Aloysius experiences grandma as cold and aloof, he may withdraw and refuse care. He'll look artificially and precociously self-sufficient. This isn't a good thing. He's pulled away from his emotional anchor. He's running on empty. We call this insecure avoidant. He doesn't know where the fuel tank is. He doesn't trust that if he goes to get fuel, he'll get it. Worst of all, in a minority of cases in the general population, if a child experiences a caregiver as unpredictably abusive and neglectful, enveloping and over-responsive, sometimes pushing away, sometimes folding in, that child has the harshest reality. That child experiences a disorganized attachment. These kids are at enormously high risk of later psychopathology, not to mention drug and alcohol problems, relationship problems, academic problems. They are in the vast minority in the general population. We don't know, but I've often wondered, and I'll wonder out loud here with you today, I think that they're really much more common in high-conflict divorce families. Because mom and dad, who might once each have been sensitive and responsive to the child's care, are now so caught up with lawyers and affidavits and depositions and court dates and money and stress, and now I don't have a partner anymore, and where's the house and where's the retirement? Excuse me. They don't have time for the kid. The quality of a child's attachment to each caregiver is specific to that caregiver. This means that Aloysius can have a secure attachment with dad and an insecure attachment with mom simultaneously. However, the quality of Aloysius' relationship with each parent is influenced by what he sees and hears from the other parent about that attachment figure. Mom can support the quality of the child's relationship with dad, or she can undermine it. We'll come back to that basic idea. All right. You all with me? Doing good? Everybody awake? Raise your hand if you fall asleep. I'll come wake you. Systemic confounds is the entree, is the path that we use to begin to talk about how the family system can corrupt the child's voice. It comes at this point in the presentation because I've just opened the door to the idea that mom can undermine the quality of the child's relationship with dad and vice versa. It's bigger than that, though. There are a lot of ways in which the circumstance, the family, and the relationships can undermine the quality of the child's attachment, security, and self and voice. So one of the punchlines here as we begin to talk about systemic confounds is this. If you are in a circumstance where your evaluating custody, for example. And even if you don't ask the question, but the child, as has been my experience more than once, walks in the door and says, "Hi, Dr. Garber, nice to meet you. I want to live with my mom." There's lots of reasons to be suspicious of that. So we're going to talk about some of those reasons, and maybe even how to get around some of them. The question is one of adaptation. As much as I like attachment theory and Ainsworth and Bowlby and all that stuff, I'm a much bigger fan of Darwin and evolution and the basic idea that living things change to fit into the world in which they live. So on one level of phylogenetic level, we can talk about the change of species over eons, but in a much narrower scope, we can talk about how little Billy changes who he is and what he says to fit into the war zone in which he lives. I want you to be alert to that, and to that end, I want to show you a familiar clip.
Oh, that's great. She called you and you bust the birthday party. That's great.
Don't you dare make me out to be the monster here, Daniel. Don't you dare. Yeah. You have all the fun and I get whatever's left over.
Oh, you chose the career, Miss
I
King.
have no choices here, Daniel. I have no choices. Even when I try to do something fun, you have to do it 10 times bigger. I bring home a birthday cake and a few gifts. You bring home the goddamn San Diego Zoo and I have to clean up after.
Oh, I'm sorry, but it's not toxic waste. It's a few party plates,
Why am
huh?
I the only one that feels there has to be rules?
Oh.
Why do you always make me out to be the heavy?
Oh, I don't make you out to be anything. You do it yourself, quite naturally,
You set me
Miranda.
up, Daniel, every time.
Oh, I
It's
don't
a
set
bad
you. Oh,
guy.
lighten up, will you? Just realize you're spending too much time with those corporate clones you used to despise.
I spend too much time with you, Daniel. It's over. It's over. I want a divorce.
You saw the kids on the staircase earlier? Corporate clones and San Diego Zoo and all that adult BS means nothing to them. That's adult stuff. And if those parents get caught up in, well, Billy, your mother works too much, and Billy, your father's too much of a Disneyland dad, that doesn't help anybody. The kids are watching their fuel tanks explode. Suddenly you discover that you're in the middle of the desert and you're looking at the dashboard and the needle's near the E. What do? So kids do what they need to do to fit in. They become chameleons in some ways. Do you know this movie, What Maisie Knew? What Maisie Knew. Write it down, check it out. It's on Netflix. It might be on YouTube.
Taking care of a child.
Well, why do you know better?
No, I know you.
Really?
Yes. Yes,
No.
I know you.
No, Susanna, you don't know anyone. You don't know anyone except yourself. You breathe pain wherever
Shut
you go.
up.
That's your real
Shut
pain.
up. Shut up.
Hey, do you know that's why the judge and the expert, they saw that. They
No.
saw you.
No.
Then why are they not giving you sole
Because
custody?
you got a female
No,
judge,
because-
that's why.
If that's what you want to tell yourself, then fine. If you want to tell your deluded
Don't
self.
take her, man.
I'm
Come
not
on,
taking
man,
her.
don't take
I'm
her.
not taking her. They gave her to me. Hey,
Hey, baby.
just the person we want to see.
Yeah, right.
Honey, why don't you get some clothes and things and stuff to take with us?
Let's do it.
It's okay. It's okay.
She doesn't need you telling her what I say is okay, asshole!
You feel the pain? The kids that you see every day live with this every day. To forget that is to do them a disservice. And to neglect to think about what they must do to fit into those worlds, to get their little tanks filled, is to fail at our jobs. Some of them shut down. Some of them pull into themselves and internalize and become horribly depressed. Some of them even become literally mute. Because they don't know what to say. Because what can you say when nothing is right? They're caught in the middle of these conflicts all of the time. You know, I steal these images from the internet, and it's not science at all. But when I search for an image and I have a hard time finding it, it makes me think that either I'm searching incorrectly or the topic is not real popular out there in the world. When I search for kids caught in the middle, thousands of them. I could entertain you all day with these pictures. This is something that's happening everywhere all the time. It is on lots of people's minds. When we put kids in the middle, we gravely affect that child and increase the risk that the child is going to be pressured by the parents. A Canadian court in 2007 wrote, with respect to the child's views and preferences, the difficulties determine who is really speaking through the child's words and whose views the child is really presenting. The child experiences feeling held as contingent, as something that must be earned. Feeling held, feeling loved should never be contingent, should never be earned. But these kids find, I have to say and do something specific to win mom's praise, affection, attention, and love. It creates pressure on the child, and these are systemic confounds. They commonly corrupt the child's voice and the development of a healthy self. The child's resulting behavior often inflames the adult conflict. This is one of the places where it's so obvious that we're not talking about individual pathology, we're talking about relationships. We're talking about dynamics that happen within relationships. Systemic confounds are amplified and reified, made real by confirmational bias. Come to Cancun and learn about those biases. But remember, I taught you before, you already knew, what we expect to see, we are likely to find is true. Now imagine that you're a divorcing parent. Once upon a time, you publicly promised to love, honor, and cherish this other human being. And now you are rejecting that person. You need to get validated. You need to prove to the world that you're not the schmo she is, he is. You're looking for evidence to validate your position. That's a really strong confirmational bias. It makes you interpret ambiguous things in a way that's not necessarily valid and true. Aha! More proof that I was right to leave that jerk. So this is a true story, and it's one of the most powerful stories I can tell you. 5-year-old gets off the school bus after school on Monday, had spent the weekend with Dad, returning now into Mom's care, kind of a common schedule of care. Rushes into the kitchen where Mommy's cooking supper, big smile on her face, and says, "Mommy, Mommy, Mommy, guess what? Daddy taught me all about sex." Well, I would too. But she is fueled by confirmational bias. She is not clear, calm, and consistent. She needs to validate her position. Tell me how Daddy hurt you. Well, you'd never ask that. That's a leading question. Call the police. Take her to the emergency room. Call Child Protective Services. File an ex parte motion for custody. Quick, 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 quick. In fact, $20,000, several weeks later, lots of court time, a lot of professional time. Someone finally got down on the floor and kind of calmly talked to the kid about what happened. Yeah, he taught me all about sex, about butterflies and moths and ants and beetles. He taught me all about insects. Don't forget that example. It happens all the time, and it's not just parents that happens to. It happens to us as well. But by the time that kid was really understood, The system had done so much damage. Why can't I see Daddy anymore? Where is Daddy? Doesn't he love me? What did I do wrong? And then we order reunification therapy, and Mom screws up the reunification therapy. You know, these things spiral down the toilet in a second. And the college fund is gone, and the house has 3 mortgages on it, and the kid is in 5 different therapies and had to give up gymnastics and dance and friendships. Where is the best interest of that child? Let's talk about 5 different kinds of systemic confounds: incidental preferences and aversions, the chameleon child, scripting, coaching, bribes and threats, role corruption, alienation, estrangement, and enmeshment. And if time allows, we'll get this done before lunch. We'll see. Well, let me start that differently. Psychologists and mental health professionals generally are fond of asking kids in a variety of circumstances, if you had 3 magic wishes, what would you wish for? You ever done that? I expect that human beings under the age of, 10, 11, 12, will necessarily and appropriately wish for me, here, now things. That's who we are when we're kids, me, here, now. I want a 5-year-old to wish for new Legos and a trip to Disney World and all the licorice I can eat. And if I asked you that question, you wished for those 3 same things, I'd really wonder about you. Your emotional maturity is not where it ought to be. I expect that after about puberty, 13, 14, 15, I expect at least one of those wishes to be for world peace, an end to hunger, a solution to the political climate, something of that sort. And you can wish for a new car, but not only a new car. When I get a little kid who wishes for Mommy to have a new boyfriend and Daddy to pay off the bills, something's in the way. There's a problem. That's the kind of thing we're talking about. But little kids are me, here, now creatures. And so when that little kid says, I don't want to go to Daddy's house, the first systemic confound to be concerned about are these incidental preferences and aversions. If you don't take the time, if you're not patient and child-centered, if you make the mistake of going, oh, okay, that means Daddy's a jerk, then you miss the fact that the next-door neighbor in the new apartment house has a really loud dog that I'm scared of. It's not that I don't want to go see Daddy, it's that I'm scared of the dog. Or the apartment that Mommy moves to is above a Chinese restaurant and there's really weird smells. Or the new fabric softener that Grandma is using at her house is rough on my skin. I don't like to sleep on those sheets. You get the idea. There's thousands and thousands and thousands of these things that could prompt a child to say, I don't want to go there. And if you take that the way the mom earlier took the child's statement about sex, in sex, you're going to miss the boat and you're going to do harm. So the first systemic confound that we look for are incidental preferences and aversions, otherwise insignificant features of one parent and or the environment which confound the child's apparent presentation. Please don't make me go to Mom's house. And so the patient, wise child evaluator, systems evaluator, asks the kid questions about Mom's house, Dad's house. Doesn't necessarily say why, but tell me about Dad's house. Tell me about Mom's house. Without that, confirmational bias makes it into this. I don't want to go to Mom's house. Alienation, it must be Dad poisoning the well. Motions get filed. Excuse me. Child walks away with the dad, and Mom is left out of the picture. When it turns out, in fact, that over at Mom's house we have to eat vegetables, and I have to do chores, and I have to do my homework, but Dad's house is no rules, just right. Of course I don't want to go to Dad's house. So the common incidental confounds include smells, tastes, textures, unfamiliar people, pets, and environments, schedules that conflict with preferred activities, more lenient versus more strict parenting. You know about the bidding war that happens with these kids? I already illustrated it to you. I used the ridiculous example of broccoli versus M&Ms. Mom serves broccoli, Dad serves M&Ms. Mom hears that Dad serves M&Ms, so she's going to serve ice cream and Reese's Pieces. You get the picture. Lots of access to peers, activities, and opportunities. These are factors that might be relevant to the custody consideration, but they're not sufficient to determine the custody outcome. Listen to the child too shallowly, too quickly, too superficially, and you'll make the mistake of thinking that it's real. Scripting, coaching, bribes, and threats are a second form of systemic confounds. It happens all the time. If you think it doesn't happen in your practice, you're wrong. Confirmational bias and the need for social validation among contesting parental litigants is huge. I need to show my own mom and my neighbors and the people at church that I'm right. And the custody evaluator in the court better darn well give me the kid so that I can show them that I'm right. And toward that end, because I'm not really very sure about how this works, I'm going to tell the kid what to say. So, hi, Dr. Garber, nice to meet you. I want to live with my mom. Well, who told you to say that? Happens all the time. Do you watch The Middle? You should.
It might be fun to have a little practice run at some of the questions the social worker might ask you.
Sprinkles?
Okay. There you go.
So, for example, what would you say if she asked you if your mom ever hits you?
Not deliberately. Okay. That's a good answer. But you know what's a good answer too? No. Just no.
That was good. Keep it brief, keep it simple.
Okay, I'll just tell her whatever you tell me I should say.
But
Well, you wouldn't want her to think that we're coaching you.
But aren't you coaching me?
what this? No. This isn't coaching. No, we're just practicing. Okay, so to recap, if she asks you if we were coaching you, you would say,
Yes.
no, I think you could say no for that question too. What do you think?
I'm like a no as a go-to answer.
So you're telling me to lie? Okay.
I'm going to save you this clip. There's a wonderful show, I think it's on Amazon, called Rescue Me. I'll show it to you over lunch if you want to see. It's the same basic idea. Parents will coach children all the time in lots of different ways. In that instance, the father actually bribes kids. If you tell me things about mom's boyfriend, I'm going to give you 20 bucks. But we're not supposed to talk about mom's boyfriend. All right, let's make it 50 bucks. Sure. An old case, 1986, out of Saskatchewan in Canada, where the court recorded that the 5-year-old's father did all that he could to make access difficult to persuade the kid by means of bribery with toys and promised outings so as not to visit the mother. A little bit newer, older case out of North Dakota, where mom told the 12 and 14-year-olds that she would kill herself if the kids didn't live with her. No pressure there. If you're thinking in your head that that is a rare exception, you're wrong. If you don't live with me, I'll go back to doing drugs. If you don't live with me, I'll move to the moon. If you don't live with me, I'll be dead. That kid should be worried about his next math test, not his mom being alive. Where is that kid's anchor? We see these things, the clues to these things often come up in the use of atypical words for the child as a specific person or for the child as representing a level of development. A child who says, if I don't, she'll contempt us again. What does that mean? Scratch my head. What is that? I don't know. I had a kid in the office last week talking about writing an affidavit. Huh? I don't even know how to spell that word. He keeps bringing his whore on visits. These are real. It's because of his PTSD syndrome from the war. Oh, PSTD, sorry. And what is that? Well, I don't want to pay you because we can't even pay the mortgage. These kids have been triangulated. They've been polarized. They've been pulled into the adult conflict. Scripting is also evident when the affect is incongruent with the words, when the emotion and body language is distinct from the content being expressed. This kid's smiling as he says, "She's scum, I hate her." Those are scripted words I've been told to say, but I don't really feel it. I sometimes ask kids to do drawings for me, not because I use these as projective instruments, but because when you get out of face-to-face, you often get around some of these systemic confounds, particularly scripting and such. So in this instance, this 12-year-old, draw a picture of your family doing something together. You can see from left to right, he drew himself and dad and paternal grandfather and paternal grandmother, whom he calls Nana. And he said, I said, what are you doing together? And he said, we're at a baseball game and we're happy. Great, thank you. Please draw your other family doing something together. Okay. Wow, what'd you draw? We're bowling. I'm unhappy. Why? I don't like being with her, and she's always happy even if I'm unhappy. She's always happy, and she'll just say stuff. Well, later, it turned out that Dad told him what to do. Dad told him to portray Mom as evil and nasty. Third form of systemic confounds comes in the form of role corruption. Remember the gas tank? Parents are supposed to refuel their kids. Role corruption describes a problem in the system of refueling. Role corruption is most evident when the child is adultified or parentified, made into the gas tank for the parent. We're talking now about systemic stresses that are associated with role corruption and boundary diffusion. Among them, the literature suggests that poverty, a parent's absence, including military deployment, debilitating illness and death, and parents' character pathology, but most particularly co-parental conflict, separation, and divorce, are the things that can cause a child to be forced out of the role of child and into some other role that corrupts the child's opportunity to remain a child. My personal and professional policy, the one that I like to live and teach, is children should be children as long as they possibly can. I go to work every day in a room full of toys. It's great. I try to be a child as much as I can. These children shouldn't be forced out of childhood because their parents are needy. This is a 2007 British Columbia ruling. The evaluator concluded that the child was enmeshed with her mother and consequently hypersensitive to mother's needs. That's adaptation. That's a failure of dripness. Enmeshed means the boundaries are poor, are developmentally inappropriate, that the child and mom are sharing feelings and thinking and behavior in a way that's getting in the way of the child developing appropriate autonomy. That's that book, Holding Tight, Letting Go, and what that's all about. Mom projects her own issues onto the child and has difficulty distinguishing her feelings and issues from those of the child. Mini-me. It's a funny movie or a stupid movie, as the case may be, but it's real in these people's lives. One form of role corruption is seen as adultification. These words are horrible, but they're the only ones we got, and they describe the thing we're talking about as best as I'm able. Adultification describes the instance in which a caregiver enlists a child as his or her partner, peer, or ally. It often happens when mom or dad is newly separated from a former partner and turns to the only other person in the house to fill that void. You're the man of the house now, which I guess we used to say in Little House on the Prairie days. We don't say that anymore, but I still hear it a lot. It's not that 7-year-old Billy is the man of the house now. He's still a child. He can't be, he shouldn't be, he mustn't be prematurely promoted into an adult. He's not prepared for that. But if he is promoted that way, if he's adultified, what's going to happen to his maturity? His social maturity is going to shoot up because he's going to spend a lot of time with adults, and his emotional maturity is going to be stunted. And I can say that to you now because you remember before we talked about décollage across different kinds of maturity. And that kid who goes into court with those lawyers from Massachusetts will look socially mature and will be given privileges he shouldn't have, and he emotionally can't manage. He'll be dysregulated. This illustrates the point. Thank you. I find laughter very gratifying. Adultification has been associated with, in literature, read Linda Burden on this subject if you're curious, but specifically poverty, victims of intimate partner violence, Mom is being beaten by dad. Could be gender reversed, of course. Mom allies with an older child, particularly a daughter. Takes the child on, takes the daughter on as a peer, as an ally. We have to survive together against dad. And immigrant families, and there are always exceptions to every rule. Remember earlier we talked about cultural variables. It's probably adaptive and necessary if you don't speak the language, but your son or daughter has learned it at school to take the kid to your doctor's appointment to translate for you. That's a form of adultification, but I guess it's culturally acceptable or necessary. But still, you got to wonder what it does to that child's sense of self in childhood. A lot of little kids, and I'm tempted to say just girls, but it's probably both genders in fact, who become their parents' caregivers grow up to become psychologists and nurses because they learn this is how I get affection in the world, is by taking care of others. And some of them are horribly resentful because they get confused. Whoever's going to take care of me? Have you seen that? The adultified child is typically first or only born, is verbally or socially precocious, proudly embraces the new role, and is at high risk for anxiety, hyperorganization, OCD, poor relationships with others, poor educational and career achievement. And I wonder, but I'm not aware that there's literature to support this, whether that child is at super high risk for sexual abuse. Once you promote your son or daughter to become your best friend or ally, your peer, filling that void takes on extra meaning and can be really, really destructive to the child. I'll show you a funny clip. This is the adultified teenager, or the adultifying mom.
Just want you to know, if you need anything, don't be shy, okay? There are no rules in this house. I'm not like a regular mom. I'm a cool mom. Right, Regina? Please stop talking. Okay, I'm gonna make you girls a hump day treat. You guys, happy hour is from 4 to 6.
Is there alcohol in this?
Oh, God, honey, no. What kind of mother do you think I am? Why, do you want a little bit? Because if you're going to drink, I'd rather you do it in the house.
No, thank you.
So, you guys, what is the 411? What has everybody been up to? What is the hot gossip? Tell me everything. What are you guys listening to? What's the cool jams?
Mom, could you go fix your hair?
Okay. You girls keep me young. Oh, I love you so much.
Thank you. Parentification is not mutually exclusive with adultification. The parentified child has not only been taken on as a peer ally, but has been enlisted to care for the caregiver. 7-year-old Sally has to remind mom to take her meds. 10-year-old Billy has to tell dad to stop drinking. Has to tuck dad in at night after he's fallen asleep drunk on the couch. Has to pay the bills, has to make the meals, has to raise the younger sibling. The parentified adult enlists the child as his or her caregiver in a genuine role reversal. Today's USA Today has a full-page story about a family in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, about an agency in Milwaukee, Wisconsin that helps these kids. It talks about kids becoming the parents. They grow up and have kids, and the cycle repeats itself. Here's one of the things that astonishes me time and time again in the course of doing the work that I do. Can you watch me, please, for a second? Over the course of generations, parent, child, parent should give to child grows up to become a parent, gives to child, the dominoes fall in this direction. A parentifying parent demands that the child take care of her. And then this child grows up needy, never having been nurtured, and asks her child to take care of her. The thing that brings tears to my eyes that I don't understand, but it is a testament to the robustness and adaptability of human beings, is I know adults who were parentified, had to raise their children, and are able to reverse the flow over the generations and take care of their children. I'm thinking of one woman in particular who had no caregiving growing up, had to raise her parents, and now is raising her autistic son. It's amazing and astonishing. It gives me faith in our species. Let's get this done, then we'll go to lunch. Parentification. Daughters are more likely to be parentified than sons. Mothers are more likely to parentify than fathers. Parents who report that their parents were not adequately nurturing are prone to parentify. Parents who find their adult partners inadequately nurturing are prone to turn to their children to care for them. Parentification is associated with immigrant status, poverty, dual income families, adult chronic and critical illness. Substance dependence is a big one. We're having a heroin addiction epidemic in New Hampshire. You've perhaps read about it in the news. Maybe it's so here also. And characterological dysfunction, DSM-4 terminology, Axis 2. Axis 2 stuff. Forgot DSM-4 for a second there. Single-parent families in which the mother becomes so overburdened that she begins to rely too much on her right-hand man. The parentified child often becomes parent to the parent. The structure is maintained at the cost of the child's normal, age-appropriate thrust towards interaction with his peer group. That means that when you're forced to raise your parent as a child, you don't have a childhood. Parentified children are often depressed, have suicidal feelings, shame, guilt, worry, isolation. They somaticize, that is, they have body complaints associated with anxiety. They have distrust for others, dependence on others, and misuse of their own parental authority. Let me show you one parentified child that perhaps you've already seen if you're a Facebook subscriber. I am not, and we should talk about whether you should be professionally. But you've seen this child before, and then we'll go to lunch.
Someone else than me. Mom, are you ready to be his friend?
Yes.
Try not to be that high up to be friends. I want everything to be low, okay?
Okay.
Just try your best. I don't want you and my dad to be replaced and meanies again. I want you and my dad to be placed as settled and be friends. I'm not trying to be mean. I just want everyone to be friends. And if I can be nice, I think all of us can be nice too. I'm not trying to be mean, but I'm trying to do my best in my heart. Nothing else than that. I want you, Mom, my dad, everyone to be friends. I want everyone to be smiling, not like being mad. I want everything to smile. Especially when I see someone, I want them to smile. Especially Nana, everyone. I want everyone to smile. And if that's for my dad and you, Mom, I think you can do it. I think you can settle your mean heights down a little to short heights. Then it's both, okay? I'm not trying to be mean. I'm not trying to be a bully. I'm trying to be steady on the floor, not way down, on straight.
Well, you're laughing, but what's going on in that child's head? How much room does she have for Sesame Street and Friends and... All right. We're not as far along as I'd wish that we were, but we're going to come back from lunch really promptly at 12:30, and we're going to get this job done today. Glad to talk to you over lunch. Have a great meal.